We have got to obey the Lord and His commandments to us. And Israel didn't, and He kept long suffering. If you read the Old Testament, it's a long book of God constantly calling His people back and them pushing Him away. He is long suffering. And of course, if we're honest, we can talk about ourselves in our own lives. God has been long suffering with us. We emphasize this. Every one of us deserve hell. If God had just decided to wipe the entire human race out and throw us all into the lake of fire, we deserve it.
You have the right to do so.
Now think of what He's put up with in your life. Even after you were saved and you knew the Lord and you knew you're saved, you have the Holy Spirit in you, but how many times have we let our guard down, not had that wall up, or how many times we just made bad choices, and some of us have even had moments where we've just been totally rebellious, and God has had to deal with us, and He does, but thank God He doesn't throw us in the lake of fire, even though we deserve it. A long-suffering God. Well, look at Hosea 1. I want us to look at that because we have a habit here of running the references that God gives us. And in this, it's Hosea, Joel, and Amos. Go right after Daniel, and you'll find Hosea. And in Hosea chapter 1, verse 10, these are the kind of things that those who rejected Jesus Christ in the early century, while He was on the earth in the first couple of centuries, these Jews that rejected their Messiah, they had to ignore a lot of their own book. They had to ignore a lot of the Old Testament. And here's one place they ignored. In verse 10 it says, "Yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured nor numbered. And it shall come to pass that in the place where it was said unto them, Ye are not my people, there it shall be said unto them, Ye are the sons of the living God." That's me and you. That's us. That's our ancestors. At the time that Hosea said this, our bloodline, if we traced it back far enough, we would probably find that our ancestors were among those pagan tribes offering sacrifice to false gods. I think all of us would find, without any exception or without many exceptions, that our ancestors were at this time not called God's people. And Hosea is telling the Jews, you are going to finally run God's mercy to the point where He's going to throw you off for a time and say, now these are my people. And that would be the Gentile believers. And I don't think a lot of us Gentiles have taken the time we ought to really meditate on that. To really think about that. And what God has done by taking you and grafting you into the body. Especially when you understand His plan going from the Old Testament. Now let's go back to Romans 9, and we're going to see Paul makes reference in the next couple of verses to Isaiah, another prophet in the Old Testament. So you can see anybody who says the Old Testament's not for our day, they must not read the New Testament because it's chock full of the Old Testament. Mm-hmm. It's rightly dividing and understanding the right division and the right application that the New Testament remains for us today. So let's read beginning of verse 27 of Romans 9 and go ahead and read through verse 29.
Esaias also crieth concerning Israel, Though the number of children of Israel be as the sand of the sea, a remnant shall be saved. For He will finish the work and cut it short in righteousness, because a short work will the Lord make upon the earth. And as Esaias said before, except the Lord of the Sabbath had left us a seed, we had been as Sodom, and had been like unto Gomorrah.
Now Isaiah makes reference to something here that is a really fascinating truth that we have seen throughout the ages and we've seen for 2,000 years, and that is that a remnant out of Israel will be saved. You know, that's been true since the very beginning. Of course, the very first believers, the day of Pentecost and Peter's ministry right there were Jews. But within a few years, we saw that change, and it became a Gentile bride, a Gentile church, made up mostly of Gentiles. And since then, for 2,000 years, the church, although we've talked about there's been Jewish believers, and some of them have been very wonderfully used of God, but yet the majority have been Gentiles, and of the Jewish population, it's only a very small remnant. And we've discussed this in Israel. You go to Israel today, nearly 80% profess atheism in the nation of Israel. And of that 20% that claims to believe in God, very small numbers are Messianic believers, as we call Jews who believe, Messianic Jews. And so it's been a remnant. And if you look, we're going to look in a few weeks, but go ahead and turn over to Romans 11. And look what it says, right up to the very end, this is going to remain true. And in verse 25, he says, "For I would not, brethren, that ye should be ignorant of this mystery, lest ye should be wise in your own conceits, that blindness in part is happened to Israel, until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in. And so all Israel shall be saved. As it is written, there shall come out of Zion the deliverer, and shall turn away ungodliness from Jacob. For this is my covenant unto them, when I shall take away their sins." You see, there's two extremes that are taught regarding Israel. One is that Israel's been thrown off completely and forever and has been replaced. That makes no sense when God still talks about them all the way up to the end of time, or the end of this age. That even after the time of the Gentiles is over, then all Israel is going to be saved. That brings me to the second extreme. The second extreme is that all Jews are saved. That you shouldn't go out and preach the gospel to the Jews. Have you heard that? Very recently, some of the most well-known preachers have embraced that. John Hagee being one, the TV preacher. And I can't remember the other name, but there's been several who have told people that they shouldn't go out and preach to the Jews. It's a waste of your time. They have their own covenant. And that if they follow the Torah and do the things they ought to do under the Torah, then they'll be saved. Let me just throw this out there. One problem with that is the Torah says they have to offer sacrifices in a temple, and there's no temple and no sacrifices.
Right.
So there's no way a Jew can be saved keeping the Torah because they don't have a temple or a sacrifice. But beyond that, even here, they'll use this actually, where it says all Israel shall be saved, and they'll say that's all inclusive of every Jew that ever lived, which is ridiculous.
They completely forget the Gospels.
Well, let me finish this thought though. When it says all Israel right here, it's talking about all those who are alive at the end of the tribulation period. It's not talking about all Israel who has ever lived, and all Israel shall be saved, as though God's going to take all the offspring of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and put them into heaven. It says all Israel shall be saved at the time of the end of until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in. That's the tribulation period. But all the Jews alive then aren't going to be saved. 2/3 of those are going to die, according to the prophetic passages. Only about 1/3 of all Israel will survive the tribulation period and be saved by the return of Jesus Christ. They'll be spared the wrath of the Antichrist, who is going around trying to wipe people out. And so in this passage right here that we're reading, don't let people take it out of context and understand that you got these extremes. You are only saved by faith in the gospel of Jesus Christ, and that's by the grace of God. And even if you're a physical offspring of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, you still are not saved unless you believe the gospel. And that's what Mike was mentioning, is that how can you say anyone's saved and not require a belief in the gospel? You've thrown the gospel out the window if you say you're saved just because you're a Jew.